that direction. So I wanted to actually start the panel discussion by maybe exploring a cognitive dissonance or a distance between some of the talks. So the picture that Lauren portrayed of this kind of increasingly, we might say, kind of enshittified information ecosystem, right, where you've got data pollution, so you've got models producing synthetic content that then's taken up as the next kind of set of data that becomes part of the future data distribution, of models that, large language models that have a kind of universal purport, so they're producing outputs as if these are generalizable outputs, but they're actually culturally specific to the data on which they're trained. You've got these other kind of current harms that are going on. And so I think that vision of where the technology is at is, in a sense, out of step with this vision of the acceleration of the technology moving towards superintelligence, moving towards AGI. And so I guess I want to maybe ask you, Garrison, because I think they were nice. The two talks were nice kind of bookends. So how do you in your work kind of square that distance between potentially recursively improving systems that are advancing at a certain pace and actually the lived experience of how these models are actually being used on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying I hate AI slop.
I hate seeing it on the internet. It's frustrating. I think there are a lot of problems with these models that you laid out very nicely. I don't think to be worried about catastrophic or existential risks from AI systems, you have to think that current systems are human level or even like close to human level. You just have to think that that is possible in our lifetimes and that progress will continue. I do think that these models are quite impressive at a bunch of tasks. And I think if you look at the cutting edge of these things, like you mentioned, like the hallucination rate of a third for 4.5, but deep research from OpenAI is a hallucination rate of 13%, I think, on the same metric. And so, yeah, there's always going to be kind of a jagged edge to this frontier, and different models will be good at different things. But I think it's totally possible we have a world of like the internet is full of bullshit generated by AI, but also AI systems are writing, half of the code at Google. It's a quarter right now. And they're getting better and better and better at these tasks because it's possible to get good data for them because there's a lot of business value in doing so. I don't think there's an inconsistency between that, though these ideas are often pitched as in tension with one another.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have no problem finding room on my dance card for existential risk. But I don't like existential risk to be used to inflate what the technology right now is doing or distract from the fact that actually existing harms are happening every day and with almost no public discussion. So I think that we need to have the discussion about actually existing harms, public discussion, public education, and while having it, mention existential risk and the possibility of programs, models that are equipped with autonomous agents, which would be a separate system, being a real concern. I think we should take the advice offered by Margaret Mitchell and colleagues seriously. And so we should have the discussion about harms should be had as a range of harms up to and including existential risk. Instead, what you have, and this is something that the industry is very happy to see, is men in suits discussing existential risk while actually existing harms, public oversight, AI slop, concentration of power, surveillance, et cetera, are sort of soft claims. So that when Jake Tapper asked Jeffrey Hinton whether he was regretful that he had not paid more attention to Timnit Gebru's work. Hinton's response was, I'm paraphrasing, she is not concerned about the serious risks that I am concerned about, which I'm not even sure is true, much less what I think of as a serious response to the question.
So I want to maybe ask a question that goes in a different direction to Jillian and Thierry. And it's really coming from Joshua's talk, where he's kind of sort of referring to this, if you will, geopolitical race to AGI, to superintelligence. And so obviously there's a justification here that the end point of superintelligence gives a competitive advantage to whichever state or state via controlled organization, controlled corporation, sort of attains that superintelligence capacity or however you want to describe it. So I guess the question is, first, how do we confront those geopolitical dynamics as they tend to be informed by this kind of aspirational story about AGI and superintelligence, right? Because you listen to Eric Schmidt, the way he represents the tensions and the need to sort of accelerate at the expense potentially of concerns about safety, concerns about risks. So I'm just wondering, are there ways in which there are routes out of that would seem to me to be kind of mutually assured escalation at the geopolitical level, right, between competing technology powers that are sort of aspiring for this endpoint that's called superintelligence?
Okay, big question. So first of all, I think it's misleading for us to be thinking about this as a race to be first. I think there's definitely, you don't want to be left behind. You don't want to be participating in a global economy or geopolitical military context where one side or one group has extraordinary tools that are not available to the other. But I really don't understand the get there first thing. I don't think there's something poof that happens at being there first. So I think there's that piece. So I think that is engendering, as markets do, right, as a global economy does, a lot of pressure for things to move very rapidly and to pour billions and to say we can't afford to sit by and just say we'll let this happen more slowly. So I think what that clearly does generate is an obligation sort of in the international community to start taking seriously what are the bounds we want to put on this process. So I participate in a series of talks called the International Dialogues in AI Safety with a lot of Chinese, it's mostly academics, but a lot of Chinese academics and scholars. We recently issued from our Beijing meeting last spring a call for red lines. I think we'll continue that conversation. We have another meeting coming up this summer in Shanghai. I think it's really important globally for us to be beginning to build that international governance muscle. I do not think we are going to get international governance muscle on privacy, fairness, explainability, or even red teaming for biological weapons. But I think we could be drawing red lines, and I think there are ones that we need to be out there on the frontier saying, what is it that everybody on the planet would agree on? Oh, we shouldn't have self-replicating autonomous systems that are just roaming around doing whatever they want, right? So can we agree on that? Okay, now let's figure out how to build the institutions and the processes for managing that. I think eventually that gives us the capacity to say global trade is going to work better. The world is going to be safer if we have global governance. So so I think that's where we can and should be focusing. And this is why I sort of focused in my talk on why I think it's quite dangerous that we have very powerful voices now saying there's nothing to worry about here. because there is. I don't see the world the way Joshua does, but there's a lot of science behind saying there really is potential for various kinds of catastrophic impacts on the way human societies work. And we are not ready for that. I think that's the key point. We are not ready. And it's gotten easier. It's falling back to be able to have the conversation about, gosh, we need to get the basic mechanisms in place, the basic infrastructure in place to respond to this. So I worry about the folks who are saying, this is all just science fiction. Don't worry about it. Is this dangerous as your laptop? That's a dangerous thing to say.
The question is so big that one can only try to put a few small remarks on the table. I mean, at least that's the only thing I can do. First, it seems to me that we are geopolitically, we are in trouble anyway, even with human intelligence, right? Are we one step further than the Cuba crisis, or maybe? Another remark is that it will be very interesting to see the interaction between game theory and geopolitics. I have a friend, an economist, who tried to convince historians that examining the causes of the First World War through game theory was extremely interesting. So, I mean, again, game theorists will have an interesting field ahead. Another remark is that this morning we did not talk very much about positive outcomes, diagnosis or whatever. I mean, it's not as if we were in without AI, we were in a superb condition. I mean, we all die, we all suffer. There are relations of power anyway. So maybe we can also. I mean, I agree that we should consider the whole scope. I mean, the existential risks, the everyday risks, but also let us remember that there are positive outcomes, and all this balance will be, I mean, is fascinating and will be extremely interesting to watch, and maybe we can act a little bit on that.
Great. So, Garrison, I guess I want to ask you to maybe reflect on one of the elements of the workshop that's been covered, but we really haven't done the deep dive into, which is this kind of imminent arrival of a commercialization explosion in agentic AI. So I want to ask, how do you see, I mean, you've done all of this research, right? And thinking about corporate power and all of these relationships that have developed in terms of the momentum of the development of the technology. Is it a foregone conclusion that the emergence of all these sort of agents, these entities that are going to be out there in the world, that we'll just have to deal with it because there's just no way to stop it?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to deal with a lot. I also, as I mentioned at the end of my talk, I think there could be galvanizing moments if there's like a huge uptick in unemployment as a result of automation, or a disaster where people die as a result of AI systems. I think there will be a really strong societal backlash. If you look at public opinion polling, large majorities of the United States, of the UK, don't want superintelligence. They don't want artificial general intelligence to be developed. And they want guardrails. They don't want to race with China. But if you ask them, what are your top 10, 20 issues? AI is just not on the list. And so if there's an event that makes this more salient, if there's another ChatGPT moment, which I think agents is the next plausible guess for what that looks like, then you could imagine like suddenly this is a top 5 issue, top 3 issue for large swaths of people. But short of that happening, I don't see a counterbalance to the immense commercial pressures to roll out these systems.
So, Lauren, do we need a catastrophic sort of event to trigger the?
Yeah. I think we have catastrophic events going on right now. And if I don't like to get involved in too many speculative scenarios about the future, because I just think it's kind of impossible to do, though I think that that's a reasonable claim to make. You never know how people are going to behave in catastrophic circumstances. plenty of people feel extremely unhappy with their working circumstances. Plenty of people are very concerned about climate. So although it may be the case that AI, which nobody really knows what it means anyway, right? Like 5 years ago, AI was like a movie or a book, right? Now, suddenly it's a thing that you don't know anything about and are hearing all this stuff about. So what I would say about the good things that Thierry said, I think it's connected to this regulatory bind that we're in. The reason that generative AI, with its supposed pathway to AGI, is what's being touted is that it's the only kind of thing that is ostensibly good for the biggest tech companies. They have the most data, they have the most compute, they have their fingers on the biggest investment. On my slides, I was going to show you like the machine learning sepsis test that was developed, which will probably save lives, but won't make trillions. We would have more of that. And we would also have better and probably more efficient language models if we weren't in a situation where regulation is being demonized because it's not good for Google or OpenAI or Microsoft or what have you, rather than pointing out that actually, when left to their own devices, these companies are not innovative at all, right? I mean, OpenAI wasn't a big tech company until quite recently. And in fact, Microsoft, when was the last time they innovated anything? When was the last time that Facebook innovated anything? Newsfeed, right? These companies buy competitors, and that's how, and then they get bigger. So big tech is actually part of the innovation problem as well as other problems. How you can actually rein things in when they lobby so intensively and they are so successful. I don't know, maybe if they fire a few more software engineers, we'll see some unionization there.
Okay, so to close the panel, I'll go across and hopefully each one of you can answer the question. So if we talked about a lot of risks today, and some possible actions that would address them. So I'm wondering from each of you, if you could just identify one kind of priority risk that you see as being in need of kind of direct address, and also what type of action can be taken to address the risk. Maybe I'll start with, we'll go from Lauren across.
The risk of people getting stupider as they, are encouraged to rely on tools that will make them completely clueless about the difference between true and false.
We've talked a lot about existential risk, so I'll mention the risk of stable totalitarian regimes empowered by AI systems and lethal autonomous weapons, solving language processing, transcription, machine vision. These aren't totally solved, but like there's been so much progress on this that you can now, if you're a government, sort through every single text message, phone call, image from a CCTV camera and make sense of it, combined with, robots that will not hesitate to fire on protesters the way that human soldiers often do. And you can imagine a regime that just knows basically everything that's happening domestically. And one of the key ways that these regimes fall is no longer an option because they have perfectly loyal soldiers. I don't have a good solution for this. I think encryption is important. I think that international agreements on lethal autonomous weapons, killer robots, is important. There was a lot of momentum around this a few years ago, and it seems like that air has been taken out of the room, and you're seeing autonomous systems in Israel being used to target people and catching a lot of civilians. You're seeing lethal autonomous weapons used in Ukraine for the first time on the battlefield. And if these systems give an advantage to governments, they will use them under conditions of competition. And so we need international agreements to govern those systems.
Yeah, and just to say, I think that the issue of AI militarization and AI weaponization's really starting to show up again on the radar screen. You've got a lot of people talking about, AI's Oppenheimer moment, but in the deflationary sense, that just these are these dynamics of escalation and autonomization of weaponry, that the competitive advantages are just too great for the military powers to not do it, right? The competitive disadvantage of not doing it is too great. So,
just one. Yeah, so I think the one I'll highlight, I mentioned in my talk as well, is I worry a lot about societal disruption, collapse, destabilization, and I worry about that because we are not even building the handholds into which we could place good regulation if we figured out what it is we should be regulating. And I would say right now we actually don't even really know what to put in place. So two things I'll mention about that, both having to do with sort of the information ecosystem into which this is being built. I think, Thierry, you might have mentioned this, or Garrison, or even Lauren, I don't know. But I said, this is probably the first time in history we've had such a consequential technology built entirely inside private technology companies. And with the legal frameworks that we invented sort of for the mass manufacturing economy, with the idea that there's this boundary around this fictional thing called the corporation. And so we take for granted that whatever is inside the corporation, they're entitled to keep inside the corporation. Well, we invented that as a legal standard. That was just something we dreamt up as a way to make things work better, to encourage innovation, encourage investment, and so on. That's fine when you can buy products and reverse engineer them or run them through crash tests. You're building on public domain biology and physics and chemistry and so on. But because these models are not actually theoretically understood, we don't know why they work. There's no science there. There maybe is a science we could develop, but we, outside of the companies, so researchers, academics, governments, don't have the capacity to study it. And so I think one of the key things we need to be thinking about immediately is changing that boundary, because we absolutely cannot just put ourselves in the hands. And I'm an economist. I love markets. I think corporations are a great invention, but we cannot have this kind of transformation happening in a 19th century information ecosystem. We need to have access to that information in order to even understand, so that Lauren and I aren't having a debate about, well, how did DeepSeek really train? I mean, they've put it out there, right? But we don't know. We don't know what's in the data. We don't know what's in the training methods. We don't know what kind of fine tuning is happening. We don't know who the roles are. They're being played by various groups. We just don't know. After GPT-3, out of OpenAI, there's no paper describing the techniques and the data. I think it's just really important that we rethink what is proprietary information and for corporations.
Difficult to say better than you guys. There are three skills. First, what is the sense of human history? That's the question that is raised. Second, can science help? That's what you are saying. And I would also fully agree with Lauren. We are all fighting to be a little less stupid. I've spent a life trying to do math, and math did not have any impact on anything, at least my math. And we are in a situation where we feel that our science can be useful, or it can help preventing dangers and so on and so forth. But I feel, and when I was on the plane discussing with Emmerich, he explained me lots of things about AI, or this morning, maybe sometimes we have the impression we can be a little bit more clever. Well, let's fight.
Well, thank you, the panel. If you'll join me in thanking everybody for making it today.